Tell us what you've learned so far from your hearing, and tell us where you're going with this.
We're having a three-part hearing today. We focused on the impact of crushingly high prescription drug prices on patients, on those who require them. And what we learned is that patients are going without needed drugs, that they have a terrible time affording these drugs, and that it's taking a toll on their health and on their finances. Tomorrow we will pick up and hear from policy experts on what we might be able to do, and then the third hearing later this spring we will hear from administration officials about their efforts to dampen the rise of prescription drugs and make their costs more transparent.
So, as you know, the Kaiser Family Foundation has done some research, some polling on this, and they find that almost 80% of Americans believe that prices for prescription drugs are too high. And to pick up on your point, almost a third, 29%, say that they don't take all the medication they should because of the cost. What could be done about that?
That is what is most disturbing, is when you hear from people who actually need these medications that have been prescribed by their doctors, and they simply cannot afford the thousands of dollars each month in some cases that the medications cost. I think there are a number of actions that we can take. First, we need to have a more competitive prescription drug marketplace, and that means addressing, for example, the gaming of the patent system, where a brand name manufacturer will, when the patent is about to expire on the drug it's developed, file a whole bunch of new patents and change the formulation of the drug just slightly as an attempt to keep competitors out of the marketplace. We've got to stop that gaming of the patent system. There are other actions that we can take as well. For example, sometimes the generic companies have a very difficult time getting a sufficient number of samples of the brand name drug in order to do the bioequivalency tests that are required by the FDA. That should not be allowed to occur as well. So those are a couple of ideas that we're exploring, and I've introduced a bill on the patent issue just this week, a bipartisan bill.
So one approach would be get more competition from generics, basically. Both of those things sound like they would facilitate generics, which will compete down some of the prices. What about the so-called PBMs, the pharmacy benefit managers? We hear a lot about that, particularly from the drug companies, who say the real problem here is there are these payments going to them. Some people might even call them kickbacks, that's really driving up the cost. Do you have any initial thoughts on that?
I certainly do. I have never seen a supply chain that has less transparency in it than for prescription drugs. And what we have are a series of middlemen who benefit from the pharmaceutical company having a high list price because they get rebates that are usually a percentage of that price. The administration has, to its credit, proposed a new rule that would say if there are rebates, or better yet, discounts, that those discounts have to flow down to the patient at the point of sale at the pharmacy, and that we need a different system for reimbursing those who are doing the negotiation, the pharmacy benefit managers. There are a lot of people getting very wealthy along this entire supply chain, and in the end, the patient often is not seeing the benefit of the negotiations that occur to produce a lower price.
Senator, you're the chair of the special committee, the select committee on aging up in the Senate. Do you envision ultimately legislation either from your committee or perhaps from other committees coming out to address this? Or is this something that will be dealt with by regulation, by other means?
I think we need an all-of-the-above approach. Our committee does not have legislative authority, but what we can do is do the hearings to identify the legislative solutions, introduce the legislation, which will go to the Judiciary Committee or the Health Education Committee. And I also believe the administration is right to pursue regulatory solutions, since, after all, the Medicare program and the Medicaid program are big payers when it comes to prescription drugs. Another option that the administration's looking at, and we're also doing through legislation, is where there are shortages of prescription drugs, which occurs periodically in this country, we ought to be able to import from a country like Canada that has lower prices. In fact, it's really re-importation, since we've sent the drugs to Canada in the first place. It does not seem fair to me that the United States consumers bear the costs of the research and development of drugs that benefit the entire world.
As I said in the introduction, it appears at least that Republicans and Democrats overall can agree on some need to address prescription drug prices. But that's not all of healthcare costs. I mean, healthcare costs, as you know so well, are rising dramatically as a percentage of GDP, up between 17 and 18% now. A lot of those costs actually are not prescription drugs. They're other things. There's not as much unanimity in that area. You've been very outspoken on this. Are there things that you are hopeful Republicans and Democrats could get together in the rest of healthcare to really bend that cost curve?
Yes, I am. I think we need to look at more innovative healthcare delivery models. We need to modify some of our reimbursement policies. For example, there's a practice in Maine that does a terrific job of checking on people who have diabetes, which is one of our most expensive diseases in this country, and yet they can't get reimbursed by Medicare for making that weekly call to the patient to make sure they're complying with their diet, their medication, and to check on their blood sugars. And yet Medicare will pay if that patient with diabetes has terrible consequences from uncontrolled diabetes and is forced to have amputations or loses his or her sight or has heart disease. So we need to look at what we reimburse for and help change our policies to help keep people well. That will lower healthcare costs in the long run.
Senator, before I let you go, let me ask one question, not about healthcare directly, and that is about the resolution that's pending right now up in the Congress, passed by the House, about to go before the Senate to rescind the president's declaration of emergency to build that wall. We just had Senator John Thune, your colleague, on earlier this hour, and he said that that vote might well come next week. Where are you on that, and how do you count the votes? Recognize John Thune is a whip, so he's a vote counter.
That's right. I am for the resolution, and in fact have co-sponsored a resolution with Senator Udall of New Mexico. I feel very strongly that this is not about whether or not you're for a wall or against the wall, or whether you agree with President Trump or disagree with President Trump. This is a constitutional issue. This is about Congress protecting its constitutional prerogatives to have power over the purse and to appropriate funds. If the president can repurpose billions of dollars for other projects that were turned down by the Congress, that has enormous implications for our separation of powers and for our constitutional system. That is the job of the legislative branch, not the job of the executive branch or the judicial branch to decide how money is to be spent. The president's role is to either sign the bill into law or to veto it. He does not have unilateral authority under the Constitution to move billions of dollars around without permission from Congress.